Good afternoon. Thank you all again for coming here. We appreciate you being here. I always ask, so please, if we could silence the cell phones, just to avoid any interruptions. My name is Muhammad. I'm the executive director here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center. It's always a pleasure to have you here, our in-person audience, and of course, everybody that's watching online. Thank you very much for participating. It's also a great honor to introduce and welcome back our distinguished speaker, Molly Sinclair McCartney, who will be giving a talk titled Syria, Then and Now. And if you haven't noticed, many of her photographs are exhibited outside in our gallery space. So thank you very much for those wonderful pictures. During this presentation, Mrs. McCartney will share her photographs from 2010, which narrate the pre-war stories of people and places in Syria, including the ancient city of Aleppo, and the fabled ruins of Palmyra, and the busy markets and monuments of Damascus. Her photographs were taken 10 months before the demonstrations that led to revolution, and it will be contrasted with news photographs and news stories of the damage and destruction that has been done to those same scenes. And as I was telling Mrs. McCartney, I was there, I think, at the same time, and that was the last time that I was there. So it's pretty emotional and kind of, it's touching to see these things because it brings back a lot of memories. A little bit about Molly. She worked as a newspaper reporter for more than 30 years, including nearly 15 years at the Washington Post, and 10 years at the Miami Herald. In 2012, she was appointed a Woodrow Wilson Public Scholar to do the research and interviews that were needed to finish the book America's War Machine, Vested Interests, Endless Conflicts, which is the book that her husband, national security reporter James McCartney, was writing just before he died. She has a degree in liberal studies from Georgetown University, where she concentrated on U.S. foreign relations, and was a Nieman Fellow, class of 1978, at Harvard University. She has traveled around the world in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, including this trip through Syria in May 2010, which was, again, 10 months before the demonstrations. And just to let you know, so there's a number of books that will be on sale. One of them is America's War Machine. So after the event, you can buy them. And then there's also a number of photo books from her collection of pictures that will be on sale. So please, on your way out, it would be nice if you'd purchase a copy. After Mrs. McCartney speaks, we will have a Q&A session, as usual. Again, we ask that you wait for the mic to come to you so that everybody online can hear. And for the online audience, if you have any questions, you can always tweet your questions to @PalestineCenter. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Molly Sinclair McCartney.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. Can you hear me? Is this working the way it should? Yes. Okay. The presentation, as you can see, will be about Syria then and now, which is based on my pictures from a trip there in 2010. I want to start by telling you about the trip and how it came about. And then I'm going to show you some slides of pictures I took on that trip and some of the news pictures and photos of what's happened in those same areas since then. So the trip really started with a phone call from a friend of mine, a colleague, Carol Murphy, who said, we were colleagues at the Washington Post together and is still in very close touch. She couldn't be here today, but she's watching online. Carol called and said she wanted to go to Syria. She'd been there as a reporter, but she never had time to really see the country and all of the wonderful treasures and archaeological sites and architecture that there is. And she said, would you like to go with me? And I said, Carol, my bags are packed. So, of course, then you can't just show up there. We had to get visas, we had to make plans, we had to book our airplane tickets, our hotel. One of the first things I did was call Ed Garib, Shireen, thank you, to say, I'm planning this trip, what do we be sure that we are doing, that we don't miss anything? And he was very helpful. Carol took the lead in booking us online into the places we wanted to stay. And then, of course, we did a lot of reading and research to figure out a plan for how we were going to do this. Now, I also invited my husband to go with us because he had covered that area. He was very familiar with it. And his response was, been there, done that. You girls go and have a good time. And we did. So I would add that I felt, and maybe Carol as well, that we were a little like Thelma and Louise going on the road for an adventure. And we did have many adventures. Since I knew this was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip, I took a big camera with me and took pictures of everything I could see. And as a result, I have several thousand pictures. At the time we came home, we sort of put things away and then watched as things began to happen. But to begin with, I flew to Beirut in May of 2010 to meet Carol, and we started our grand adventure. We were staying at a hotel in Beirut, and we had the hotel find us a driver. We said we wanted to go to Aleppo and stop along the way at both Sirgilla, which is one of the dead cities, as well as the Crac de Chevalet. I'm working on my pronunciation. Somebody's going to help me here. Thank you. Thank you. So that was our first day. And let me give you, there's a big map over there that you might want to look at where I used a pen to show you the route we took. And let me see if I can, first of all, just orient you to where we were in the world. And then some of the numbers on what's happened there since then. I think this skipped a slide. Maybe not. We can come back and talk about that, but I really want to first get you oriented. So as you can see, we went from Beirut to the castle, then we went to the dead cities, and if you're familiar with the dead cities, you know their story. If you don't, it's a fascinating archaeological and architectural ruin that's quite unique in the world, and which actually I had no idea was even there until we started researching and figuring out what we wanted to do. Now, as we're traveling from Beirut on up through that area, and we did this in one day. We started out in the morning. We stopped first at the castle, then we went to the dead city, then we went to Aleppo. Now, that was only a couple 100 miles and 2 stops, but because the roads were pretty bad, it took longer than if we'd been traveling here. So I would say quickly, before I get to some more of the slides, that what we had no idea as we're traveling, that just within months, we would have been in the middle of the fighting that started. This was the area where there's still up in the area of the dead cities in the, help me again with the pronunciation, Idlib. That is a province, but also a town, and there are many dead city remains around that area. And that's where there's still some fighting going on, and where it has been some of the fiercest fighting. So we drove through those areas before any of this happened. Now I would say one more thing. When people talk about what started the war, the usual story is that it was triggered by the government crackdown on the teenager who wrote the anti-graffiti on the school wall, and then there was a reaction to that. But
You have the laser, if you need the laser, it's right there.
okay, so thank you. He's showing me how to use the laser. So let me see if I can do it from here. So this is where we started, and then, oh, it's going backwards. All right. So then, that was where the castle was. That's where the dead city that we stopped at, and then, of course, Aleppo. Now, I want to talk for just a second about this before I go any further. We think of, in most of the things, if you look at it on the internet, it'll give you the history of what started the war. They will talk about that graffiti and the government crackdown. But some of the experts will contend that it's really more complicated than that. And they point to the drought that hit Syria starting in 2006. It was an extreme drought. It lasted into 2011. And this had a terrible effect on what the agriculture and the farmers were able to do, and led to a huge dislocation of people. I saw one number, 1.5 million moved from these rural areas into the cities, adding to the social stress, and eventually to the uprising that broke out in 2011, which would have been about 11 months after we were there. So watching what happened when we got home, we were only there a week. But what began to happen as we were watching was astonishing, because we were seeing the war and the fighters and all the things that were going on. People were showing up from all over the world to fight there and pursue their own agendas and commit these unimaginable acts of violence. And within a year, as I said, Syria had become a killing field. Bombings, beheadings, everything. And they filmed and posted some of this on the internet for everyone to see. So think about what it would have been. That's a little more background on it. This is one of the stories I found about the impact of the drought and how the weather really intensified what eventually came this. So there we are driving toward Homs. If you know where that is, it's south, obviously, of the places. We did pass Homs. We didn't go into the city, but we came by it. And as you can see, that was some of the things that blew up there. Here's a picture from the Associated Press of 2018. So then we get to the castle. This is, of course, the one that, again, I had not heard of before. Maybe Ed told me about it. It's considered, or it was considered, the most best kept treasure of its kind in the world. The history goes back centuries. T.E. Lawrence once called it, a perfect, finest castle in the world with its own special history. And what I like about this is, is you have this little card that shows you the sort of the size of this. How many people have actually been to this castle? A lot of people. Okay. I would hope you were there before I was. So this, of course, from 2010, this fabulous architectural, archaeological things, more of that. Then you get what happened. So here, let me get this. So this is what we saw when we were there. That's my picture. This is the chapel, which originally was built by the Christians who controlled the castle back when they had control of it, the Knights. And then when the Muslims came in, they left that there. They didn't take it away. They simply added an area where they could have a space pointed toward Mecca. This is what it looked like after the war. Now, I have a video which you may or may not have seen, but a couple more pictures first. Ventilation over there on the left. This is the area for the 1,000 horses that the castle was able to accommodate. More before and after. This is Lindsay Hulsum. She was one of the first reporters to go in and take a look at the damage. She's standing where I took the picture up there when I was there. It's much closer. It's the arrow slots, which of course the snipers used when they took the castle over. And then that's just another one of the parts of the castle that we toured when we were there. There weren't very many people there when we were there. It was very isolated. It's very hard to get to. You can't just sort of show up. You really have to plan how you're going to get there. Our driver had some trouble finding it, but we did eventually arrive. Now, let's have the video. So he knows how to make this happen. This is a short news clip of her visit to this. All right, did I do that or did you? Okay.
Now, it is a Crusaders' castle built in the 12th century and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But like so much else in Syria, the fortress near Homs has been almost torn apart by the ferocity of the Syrian civil war. The Crackday Chevalier, controlled for almost 2 years by Islamist rebels, was retaken this month by government forces. Our international editor, Lindsay Hulsum, was the very first foreign journalist to enter the building since its recapture and has this report.
It's dominated the landscape since the 12th century. A Crusader castle, villages at its feet. Today, Crackday Chevalier looms over a scene of utter destruction. The people who lived here have fled, their homes and property destroyed. Syrian government soldiers showed me around. Opposition fighters occupied the fortress for the past 2 years, until a decisive battle 10 days ago. The rebels seem to have abandoned the fortress in something of a hurry. Look at everything they left behind. It seems that this was a room which they used for sleeping, eating, cooking. And the arrow slits, used by archers at the time of the Crusaders, 900 years later, in the last few months, they've been sniping positions. Bombs and artillery wreak more damage than crossbows and battle axes. Lawrence of Arabia described it as the most complete and admirable castle in the world, but parts have been reduced to rubble. Last year, the rebels filmed as government forces bombed the castle. Even the strongest fortress couldn't withstand this. Who knows when archaeologists will be able to assess the damage? The rebels, many of them jihadis from Lebanon, wrote, "There is no God but God, and Allah is his prophet." Inside the Crusader church, we found signs that they had used it as a living room. Scattered children's shoes, evidence that some had had their families with them. As fighters have done for centuries, they surveyed the area from the battlements and sometimes went on raids. 6 soldiers from the nearby village of al-Nusra died fighting the men who occupied the castle. They're seen as martyrs by the Christians who live here. They support President Bashar al-Assad and are thrilled that the rebels have finally been ousted.
Our life was terrible, really frightening. We were always worrying about our children when they went to school. The armed men in the castle terrified us.
They blamed foreign jihadis for corrupting the local Sunni Muslims who lived in the village at the foot of the fortress.
I am a teacher and I used to teach in the village of Crackday Chevalier. The people were never like that before. They were loyal and polite. They had morals. Those who came here brainwashed those young men. Those foreigners destroyed our country.
Inside the fortress, Syrian soldiers are taking up residence, just like the Crusaders, the Mamluks, the jihadis. Generations of young men fighting for religion and country. Protected by the vast walls, in their time, all must have felt invincible. But no regime lasts forever. Whatever the damage wrought by this latest conflict, Crackday Chevalier will outlast them all.
Lindsay Hulsum reporting from Syria.
they have started making repairs. How long it will take and where they get the money to do it, we don't know. But there is an effort to, and you can see they've stabilized. I'm touching this wrong, sorry. They've got they've used that to prop up the building there, but you can see it's been cleaned up, and these guys are working over there as well. So that's good. So then we went to one of the dead cities. Now there are about 700 of these. They date back centuries. This one, Sergilla, is considered one of the gems of these cities because of the fact that it is what's left of what was once a very prosperous country town of that late Roman and early Byzantine period. It's about 2.5 miles from this very tiny town. The driver, again, had great trouble finding it. The maps were not clear, the roads were not marked, and it was hard to locate. But eventually we did get there, and it's not actually that far from the main road between Aleppo and Damascus. But again, this is in the Idlib province, where the fighting between the rebels, this was an area that they were holding on to, and were one of the last ones that the government basically has come in and pretty much taken out. But it was terribly fierce fighting. So this again gives you an idea of where Idlib is. Let me do, so there in this area is where the dead city was that we went to. Here's a close-up of that. It's right in that area there. And this, of course, if you read what it says there, this was one of the areas being held by the rebels and that the government was trying to dislodge. So it was pretty ugly. Again, this happening after we were left, and we're thinking we went through this area when it was intact and when people were living their lives. This is a wonderful overview of the village, which is, of course, has been abandoned for centuries, but all the remains are there. It's fascinating. It was pretty empty when we were there. There'd been a little bit of rain, and we just walked in and walked all around, took pictures, not very many people. And this particular picture comes from, sorry, this is very sensitive, from this great book, The Past from Above by George Gerster, who's been around the world taking aerial pictures of things like this. This, of course, is a sort of one of the pictures I took that day. The little town includes what they have concluded, the people who do research on areas like this, that when it was up and running as a town, it had a church, it had farmhouses, it even had a pub. So everything you need. Another view of the city. More. Now in 2013, this picture was the picture of week in Time Life, because people trying to get away from the fighting were literally living in what were these abandoned villages and cities. Cities is probably too big a name for what the settlements were. They were smaller than really cities. And this, of course, is some of the fighting in that province, in that area, which we, at the time, it was not happening. We were there a year before it all happened. More damage. And this is fairly recent. You can see by the dates on this. Like this one is 2019. There's another one over there, which I think is about the same time. So then we left, after we left there, and here is where the little city was. This is where the dead city was that we were visiting, that I was showing the pictures of. So then we drove up to Aleppo, which of course is a big city. And more than 4 million people at the time, biggest city in Syria at the time, full of energy, full of fascinating things to see and do. And the driver, again, had trouble finding our hotel. It was down 3 alleys from the street. And when we got there, I was in the car with the bags. Carol went down the alleys to find the place, and then they sent somebody back to help. We didn't have that much bags, so we got some help to get our stuff in there. To this wonderful, small, sort of a boutique hotel. I think it had 8 rooms. but it was fabulous. Interiors were this kind of fabulous, beautifully done. It was a house that had been around for a long time, but the people who owned it and managed it had come in and sort of redone it and turned it into sort of a B&B for travelers. And this is the kind of wonderful furnishings. Great breakfast, as you can see. And then we had, this was from the second floor looking down into sort of the lobby area. I mean, who would have thought from the street, 3 alleys back, was this fabulous, wonderful place? I don't know if it was Ottoman, but it was very old. It had several basements where they had set up things like you could get a special bath, you know, when they scrub you. You could get your hair done, and then they had some offices down there as well, way down, almost like a catacomb below the ground level. I've been online. Here is their website, but you notice this was from 2012. If you go online today, it's still there because nothing dies on the internet. And you can see that TripAdvisor has no information. I have sent emails to the address saying, are you there? They're not there. And the reason they're not there is because this was in the old city of Aleppo, and that's where the old city is. And you can see this is the crisis point between the two sides that were fighting, right there. And it's also been terribly damaged by these battles. Now, who's been to Aleppo? How many of you? So you've been there, I would assume, before the war, so you know. Again, this is an older picture, but the citadel was so stunning. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, even though I'd seen pictures. But it's like, this sort of like, it reminded me kind of a volcano shape. And so, but it dominates the city, and it's just stunning to see. So we, of course, were very close. We were a 7-minute walk from the Citadel. So we went and bought tickets to tour the inside. I wasn't sure what we would find inside, but we found wonderful skylights, like over on the left, on the exterior. That's what, but you go down, and that's the pattern you get when you're looking up. And these are some of the walls and this is one of the news photos of the damage, which seems astonishing. And as I say, 7 minutes from the little hotel where we'd stayed, so I can't believe it's still there. This is a picture of the city. Now that's a picture I took from the roof of the Citadel. They had a coffee shop up there. I think this is the same view because you see those buildings there and you see them there. And this, of course, is what the war has done to that area because it was, again, caught sort of with two sides coming at each other. Again, before and after. These were people going into the Citadel's main entrance. This is a picture of what's happened since then. Again, the inside of the Citadel, I had no idea that it had so many levels and so many rooms and so many amazing things. The ceilings, look, the special work done on the walls that represented important things. Here's a ceiling with I think that's a light hanging down. I can't see from this angle very well. This is a couple going in through. You go in the door and you have several levels up and down to explore. And so they've come, and I love the picture because there she's wearing her jeans under this cover. So, and that's of course the rooftop theater on the Citadel, which they were using for special events, I'm sure, concerts, music, all sorts of things. And it's a huge, huge area. It's very hard to explain how actually big it was. More of inside the Citadel. And then the damage. in some of the statistics I found, Aleppo suffered almost more damage than any other part of the country as a result of the war. And here's an example. This is inside the major souk in Aleppo, these two things. And this is one of the pictures of the devastation there. I think there was both a fire as well as other ways in which it was so badly hurt. This was obviously a market at one of the main entrances. Things going on inside, outside. The souk just goes forever. I'm sure we've all shopped there. If you've been, that's the place to go. Now here, this is Carol, and we were talking to the jewelry store guy. He was a very pleasant young man, very interesting, and wanted to know about what we were doing there and how this all came about. And then, of course, they have the great chicken. That's chicken, right? Where he makes these sandwiches, kind of like you had, I guess, today. That just fabulous. And then the ice cream cones. Yeah, those are ice cream cones. So again, still in the souk. I love this picture because I think the guy, yeah, there he is. So and then here's another, when you look down and you see all these things going on inside, all this stuff that's for sale. Now this store has a very special place. Okay, so this guy, let me see if I can see from this angle. Yeah, there he is. So Carol and I are walking through the souk. We're looking everywhere. Now we saw sticking out like a sore thumb. I mean, we are clearly not local. But everybody's being incredibly nice. There is some English, so we were communicating. And suddenly this guy starts walking with us, and he says, well, are you Yankees or are you the Red Sox? What? Well, you know, he got our attention. He said, you know, you really have to come to my shop because I have all this great stuff. So we thought, okay, we'll go to your shop. So this was his shop. And of course, we did end up buying much more stuff than we needed. In fact, I have this necklace, which I bought there, which I dearly love. So here's another inside the souk market. And you know, just everything you ever wanted to buy is in the market. I think I saw a number that said it was like 8 miles of shops, and that goes on and on and on. And of course, in addition to the people actually selling things who have their own little space, and there are guys who are actually doing work there as well. He's working on some leather belts. The other one's doing something with wool. And of course, we spotted the American stuff, which I had to take a picture of. I thought, you know, yeah. So then, these are the streets. They were absolutely packed with people. There was so much energy. There was so much going on. You had people everywhere, shopping, buying, selling. You know, it was just sort of a moving picture. And the kids are out, delivering things. There was one pastry shop that we went in. This was one of their trays of things that they were selling. It was like, oh, can we take that home? And of course, I was surprised at how many shoe shops there were. They just seemed to be everywhere. More street scenes. And then we have this. And what the war did to Aleppo. More damage. More damage. Now they're saying with this story, this picture ran with the story saying repairs are underway. And I guess because they've sort of cleaned up the streets and have started doing, and the cars are not wrecked and they're not piled on top of each other. This represents a start toward repair, which is sad. So then we have, I had not seen the street vendors selling drinks the way that I saw them there. Now this was actually in Damascus, but they were everywhere, offering all kinds of things. I'm told that this guy was selling a licorice drink, And even the girls, this was right outside the Citadel in Aleppo. It was like the first day we were there, and we go, and this guy is there with all this stuff, and it took me a while to figure out he was actually selling a drink. And we had not changed any money, so we weren't able to even sort of buy something and see. But I held up my camera and said, can I take your picture? And he sort of like, yeah. And but the girls there are also taking his picture because he's so dressed. He sort of reminded me of Santa Claus. So I really liked that particular picture. And then when we walked around the city, we came by this church, which turned out to be the 40 Martyrs Church, which dates back to the 15th century, and it's part of the center of the Armenian community life there. So then we see where this story, the one on the right, was a picture I took at the time. That's the same area in this destruction. The initial story said it had all been destroyed. These are on the outside of the church, these wonderful carvings. And, too fast. Back, just a minute. Back. The first story said everything had been destroyed, but then a couple of days later, there was a news story saying, well, mostly it was the compound that was damaged. The church was also damaged, but it wasn't destroyed. So again, an effort to sort of rebuild it. This is one of my favorite pictures. This was in Aleppo. We'd just been to the post office, and we were walking back to the hotel, and I'm taking pictures, and I hear this guy behind me, and I sort of yell out, "Take my wife's picture!" And I turned around, and there was this cute couple, and I said, well, how about both of you? And so we stopped, and I took this quick picture, which I think really so summed up the sort of energy and friendliness of all the people we ran into. It was really, they didn't speak enough English that we could have a conversation. But I just thought that and you notice he's got his thumb up. Oh, I did it again. Give it back here. He's got his thumb up there. It's kind of hard to see, but it was his thumbs up. And I just thought the contradiction between some of the things being sold in the stores and what people were really wearing on the streets, or maybe they're wearing them under what they're wearing. I don't know. And then we had, the little boy with the 2 ice creams and more pastry treats. Now this again was a wonderful experience. This is in Aleppo, and the hotel, behind the hotel where we were staying, there was a street of shops where men were actually working on a whole variety of things, metalworks, all different kinds of things. And so I was going like one shop to the next one with my camera, holding it up and saying, can I take your picture? And again, very little English, but they understood and would say, yeah, go ahead, or indicate that was all right. So we start off, this guy was very fierce. He's not thrilled to see me, but he said, I can take his picture. I said, well, stand up. And so he goes over here. And I said, I really would like a smile, And I'm like, give me a smile, So that's what I got. Now, the guy on the left was like a street cleaner. And again, I just had my camera. I said, I'd like to take your picture. So he put down what he was doing and went and sat in a doorway and had waited while I took several pictures. This was just a cart of things being sold on the street, which was very common. This, of course, is the small commerce in town. Even a big city like Aleppo has many neighborhoods where they're selling bread on the street, they're selling dairy products, and of course then a very tiny little shop where they had some vegetables and fruits. These are some of the people, not only in those shops I mentioned, but other people on the streets or in the markets. Now they're mostly men because the women were simply not there or seemed less interested in, I didn't want to, embarrass anybody. So I just took pictures of people who seemed like they were willing to let me take their photograph. And inevitably, they all did. It was really nice. The other thing that we ran into, they would say, well, where are you from? And we would say, U.S. And they would say, oh, I have an uncle in Florida. Or my cousin lives in Cincinnati, as though maybe we would check in on them when we got home. Yeah, so that was kind of nice. But they were all interested in where we were from and what we were doing and what, places we were going. And then we went to Palmyra, which is, of course, the wonderful oasis with these fabulous Roman ruins, which if you see a picture or two, you see them. I can't tell you how spread out that area is. I mean, you couldn't even walk to cover all the area where the ruins are. And we were there late in the day, so I had that great golden sunlight to take advantage of. But of course, the best story that comes out of Palmyra for me is the Desert Queen. Again, if you know about Zenobia, you know that she was widowed after her husband died. She had a little boy. She made him the emperor, but she made herself the empress. And at some point, she even had some coins with her image made. I know this because this is part of the exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum that's either just about over or will be soon, where they have a huge number of exhibits and items in the exhibit from Palmyra and some of the other areas in this exhibit they're calling The World Between Two Empires, I think is the name of it. No, down here at the bottom. The World Between Empires. So they do have all this information. What happened, of course, is a powerful woman who upset the Roman emperor, and he, of course, set out to take back the area that she had won. But look what she did control. At some point, she had all of the area from Egypt to, I guess, Turkey under her control. That got his attention. So he went back after her, took the territory back. She had to flee from Palmyra. And there are many stories about what happened to her. She was killed, she was jailed, she married a noble, she had a villa, on and on. But what I like is that what her story has really been, has inspired many legacies, including not only artwork, but there's even an opera that's sort of based on her story. Again, this is from the Metropolitan Museum materials on exhibit there. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth doing. So, yeah, okay. This is also from that same exhibit, which gives you a little bit of a look at the really old history of Palmyra and some of the images of the old gods that were there at that time. More images. The woman down here is drawing. Obviously, she's sketching some of the ruins. I mean, this is just the detail that was still there when we visited was phenomenal. I did get this one picture of the bell, the Temple of Bel. It's from a long distance, but it's the one right here. That's the one, and of course, these ruins, still only a part of the landscape. And that is another picture before this was blown up. This is the guy who was beheaded at age, 80-something, because he'd been in charge of the antiquities there, and they were trying to wipe out all of that. So this is an aerial view of the temple, and that's after it was blown up. One of the great losses of that area. Now we did see camels. We saw a lot of these motorcycles in various stages. And then we have numbers on the actual damages. And as I say, I was struck by the fact that Aleppo accounts for almost 33% of the total count of damaged structure. And these others also had considerable damage, but Aleppo got hit harder than almost any other part of the country, or I guess got hit harder than the rest of the country, period. Now, I have spent only a little time on Damascus, although I have many pictures, because there has been less damage to the actual city, and people are going in and out of there. It's more easy, probably, to get into Damascus and some of these other areas. This, again, was at a restaurant where John Kerry, at the time we were there in 2010, had been going back and forth, and there was some thought that perhaps the U.S. might resume diplomatic relations and that Kerry might be able to negotiate it. So he was a popular guy, and he often came to this restaurant. His picture was in the lobby. It was one of the nicer restaurants in the city, and so we went, and they were making bread when we went. And we went over to talk to him and take pictures, and he said, "You're from the U.S.? I love Obama." And so another wonderful encounter with one of the people there. And of course, Straight Street, which of course we had to walk on, because that's where Paul once walked, according to the book of Acts. Obviously, he walked there before there were automobiles and a roof. But there it is. And these doors are closed because we happened to be there on it was either a holiday or something else. So those are normally open with shops and vendors out selling things like you see there. And this, of course, is another one of my favorite pictures. We had, it was at night in Damascus. We were out walking around, which the streets are full of people. Everybody's having a good time, shopping, going to restaurants, doing things. And all of a sudden, this little girl comes up to me by herself and says, you know, "Where are you from?" She had a little bit of English. "Where are you from? Why are you here?" And she was such a pretty little girl. I said, "Well, I'd really like to take your picture." She said, "Okay, but I want to get my brother in it too." So she goes off and she comes back with her brother, and they stood while I got their picture, which I thought was another wonderful encounter. So that's my slideshow. We have time for questions. And
first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. Both you and your friend are journalists.
yes.
Were you aware of any tensions when you were there?
There were two tracks. There was the one hand, Kerry's visits and the idea that things might get better between Syria and the U.S. Seemed possible. So there was a sense of, if this happens, that means tourists, that means dollars, that means help for the economy, that means life gets better. Under that, there's very much a huge frustration by people trapped in what was a corrupt regime with little hope for advancement, with little hope for doing better in life. One of the young men we talked to in one of the jewelry stores in one of the souks had his books with him. And we talked to him. He said because he was not part of the group favored by the regime, he couldn't get into the college that he wanted to get into, and therefore do something with technology or computers and have a better life. So that kind of frustration was absolutely there. And at one point, we could sort of see this happening and feel it. Nothing you could put your hand on. Although Carol said at one point, "I really think this place is going to blow up at some point, because you can't keep people suppressed the way they are now and expect it to not something happen." So there were two things going on at the same time, absolutely. Another question? No more questions? She has a question. Okay.
I was there at about the same time as you, and we couldn't go to Beirut. I came directly to Damascus, and you couldn't get a visa for Beirut. Did you have any issues with that?
No, I got my visa to get to Beirut before actually I got the one for Syria. So I don't know why there was a problem. I actually had thought there would be a bigger problem getting the one for Syria. I happened to be in Houston with family at the time, and there was a Syrian I guess, a consulate. So I literally went down in person, and everything just went very smoothly. It's no problem, no delay or anything. So yeah. So I don't know. I can't explain that. But I don't think I would be able to get a visa now. Any more questions? Yes, somebody here has a question. Okay.
Molly, you were traveling with a driver?
Yes.
The same driver during this time?
No, what we did was the driver we hired in Beirut through the hotel took us to Aleppo. He left. He went back to, I guess, Beirut. But the hotel then where we stayed in Aleppo, again, we said we need a driver to take us to Palmyra. So they found a driver to take us there. We also went, I didn't have a slide up here, but I do in the picture, one of the great places we went to from Aleppo was St. Simeon, the monastery, which is also considered a dead city because it's, it's abandoned. Absolutely stunning. It's northwest of Aleppo. We had a different driver for that because that was like a one afternoon. And the one to Palmyra was a much longer trip, took most of the day, even though it was only a couple hundred miles, because the roads were so bad and you couldn't really go in a straight line. You had to sort of go back to the main road and then work your way back. And then we had a different driver, again, from Palmyra to Damascus with a stop in Malula. And then we were in Damascus several days and hired yet another driver to take us back to Beirut. So there were different ones. This was also something my husband had talked about, that when you go to the Middle East, this is how you get around. There are people who make their living by basically driving you where you need to go. And so that's what we did, yeah. And you felt safe? Yeah, we never felt unsafe, ever. We did go through checkpoints where there were armed men looking in the car, but we have that in this country now. So, so I guess it was a good preparation.
Maybe I didn't pay attention, but how did you get the pictures after? I know.
No, those are news pictures that are on the internet.
Okay,
right, that's why I was identifying.
You compared it with your picture.
Right. I went on the internet and
thanks.
did a Google search to find pictures of what had happened in the areas where I had been. And they're all there. It's just a question of trying to match what's available with what I actually had taken myself.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I have not been back to Syria since 2010. Yeah.
Hi,
So,
Molly.
Yes. This is Shireen.
Hi.
This is Ed's wife and our guide for Syria.
So you mentioned you had tried to contact the inn that you stayed
Yes.
at, and I was wondering if you had contact with anybody else that you met in Syria, and then a couple
Yeah.
follow-up. Yeah. And then do you have one picture that's your absolute favorite? And my main question is, will you be touring at all with your presentation and your slideshow to any other cities in the U.S., or taking it on the road somehow?
Well, let me ask that question, then I'll go back to the other. I don't have any plans. I'm available. If and then the first thing you wanted to know was whether I'd been back in touch. When we were there 1 week. We were not reporting. We were simply soaking up the sights. There didn't seem to be a reason to try to get information on staying in touch with anybody. I think they might have felt that was invasive. I mean, we were just sort of there. We're passing through. Here's a quick picture. That's great. We don't know your uncle in, Florida, but we're glad he's there. So there wasn't a reason, and of course, without knowing that everything was going to blow up within a year. If I had known that, I probably would have tried to know more about the people I was taking pictures of. But at the time, it just seemed like, okay, we're going, this is great, and then things just didn't stay the same. Another question from anyone? Favorite picture? There are several. I would think the one of the couple, because it was so unexpected, and they were so friendly and helpful and happy. And I think the little girl and her brother, another very special kind of encounter. And I really like the one of the guy who went from being very fierce to being very friendly. So all the pictures of the people really are the ones that I really like the best. And of course I have more. You've seen them on the walls, and every one of those pictures has a story. So yeah, so many favorites.
Do you have any other questions?
I think she has one more.
I was just going to make a comment about transportation.
Oh.
I took public buses, and the public buses are awesome.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
maybe
yeah.
they're privately owned. I don't know. You have to pay a nominal amount, but you get a assigned seat. They serve you candy. I mean, I went to Damascus to Palmyra, and I went to Homs
Right.
on a bus. I went to Aleppo on a bus.
You can do those things. I don't think we were familiar enough with the way the system worked, and we didn't know the language well enough to try to navigate that on our own, and we had bags and stuff we were taking. So, and frankly, the cost to have the driver and the car was, compared to what you'd pay in the U.S., was very affordable. So, yeah. That's true. You had a certain amount of command over your timing and, where you're going and so forth, yeah. So, the only other thing, if we just have a couple more minutes, I would like to end it with a few more remarks. If there are no
we
more
just have
questions?
one more.
One more. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I wasn't ready before. Was the population mostly Muslim or Christian, or was it mixed?
Oh, it's very mixed. There's many. There is a percentage of the various groups, which is a slide I didn't include because there are just very many groups and many different percentages. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I think one of the things Assad has proud of is the fact that it is a secular country in many ways, which has many religions and many people practicing different religions. But I think the state itself is considered secular. Is that correct? Yeah, I thought that was right. I would add just a few things. Because the situation there is so complicated, it's very hard to keep up with what's happened and what might happen in the future. So I looked at a speech that former Ambassador Charles Freeman made in 1916, and I thought that this was still pretty current. At that time, he said there were at least 12 distinct but overlapping wars going on in Syria, maybe more. And then he listed them. Saudi Arabia at war with Iran, foreign-backed insurgents with the Assad government, Hezbollah, Iraqi, Shiite militias, and Iran with the insurgents, Islamists with secularists, foreign-backed forces with ISIS, Shiites with Sunnis, Kurds with Arabs, Kurds with Kurds, Turks with Kurds, in the U.S. separately with the Assad government, with ISIS, and with Russia. Everybody was fighting. It was like the world came to fight in Syria, which is only about the size of Washington State, which has about 20 million people when we were there. That's about what New York State has in terms of population. But of course, the drop in population in Syria since the war and the number of refugees and the amount of humanitarian needs is just huge. Charles Freeman, it was a speech that Ambassador Freeman made in 1916 talking about the landscape. What did I say? Oh, sorry. I lost a century there. Okay, thank you. Thank you for correcting that. Yeah, 3 years ago. No, yeah. Well, there probably was something going on then too, but he wasn't talking. He was talking about 2016. So my apologies for that. He also noted that the U.S., in what it was doing there, in terms of its involvement, was not only at war, sometimes with and against the insurgents, sometimes with Turkey and sometimes with the Kurds, but always against Russia. A real mess, I think, as we all know. Now, also in preparation for this talk, I did a little more research to find out what does the future look like. And I talked to one person who gave me a sort of a short summary of Syria today. And in his opinion, he thinks the U.S. will have very little say about Syria's future. And then it will be decided by the Syrians as they align with Iran, Russia, and Turkey. He also thinks that the U.S. has no relevant constituencies in the country, despite the continuation of this, in his opinion, entirely illegal military presence that is seen internationally for the arrogant contempt for the sovereignty of Syria and other countries that it is. And in his view, Obama, who's often accused of not doing enough, he thinks he doesn't agree with that. He thinks Obama had a confused intervention in Syria, which included these periodic bombing campaigns, a $1 billion CIA covert action program that subsidized the jihadis, and a completely unproductive $500 million U.S. Army train and assist effort to create a non-jihadist opposition to the government. So lots of people doing lots of things which really hurt the country and the people there. And let's hope now that it looks like the fighting has subsided and that there is some rebuilding going on, that it will get better. We hope. So.
Thank you so much for your lovely presentation. Thank you. And then everybody, please don't forget the books are on sale. And so they'll be over in the corner.